No way. But I also think I won't take it as for it. So sure you can think about it. I'm going to base it on some of the library that one of the ice cream
a certain extent to which a family needs to contain a few elements that an individual herself or himself or themselves cannot fulfill and cannot take this category and this definition. But let's take another scenario, and this time around, we have two siblings, two sisters, who are living together, and they are both applying together to receive a certain recognition of their relationship, of their family, as a family of sisters living together, and they wish to receive a certain recognition that will allow them to receive certain reductions in payments for mortgage. Okay, they are buying an apartment together, they are living together, they have been living together for almost 20 years, and they are asking the court to recognize them as a union, as a family, and to receive certain rights that, for instance, a married couple or even an unmarried couple, and nowadays even an unmarried same-sex couple, would receive. What do you think about this? Yes, Kara.
To give her a question, can we turn on one of the lights? Because right now it's seeing about work. Much better. Yeah.
Okay. Any thoughts, ideas? Do you think those two sisters can be considered a family or a couple or a union for this purpose of receiving certain benefits, certain rights that usually until now only married couples receive? What are your thoughts? Do you think that it's fair? Do you think, or I would also ask you to consider what consequences or what other, since you might be sitting on the chair of the judge or the clerk or the minister, and you know that your decisions might also be elaborated towards other cases that might be different. So if you can consider all elements here and say what are your thoughts, yes, Sarah?
I have a couple of thoughts. First, like my initial reaction is like absolutely not.
Not? Okay.
Yeah, that was my gut reaction. I feel like that's just like not, I don't know. But then when I was thinking about it, I guess like if you're thinking just like legally, I guess like they've like been living together for a while. Like I don't know, like why is being in love or like having a marriage, like why all of a sudden then do you get like all these like benefits if you're just like adults also you should like have certain legal benefits. But then if you think about the ramifications of what that means, of like what it means to be a union and like what that would mean then societally, it gets confusing. I don't know. I don't have
Okay.
fully developed.
So first of all, you're saying that your first intuitive reaction was no.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So your intuitive reaction was similar to the Minister of Housing or whoever handled that request because they refused, and that's why these sisters appealed to the courts. Okay, any other? Yes.
I think if they want to do it because they're in love, it's like weird, but it should be allowed. But I
They
think,
love romantically, you mean? Because they did not intend that. They did not claim that. That was not one of the claims they had, that they are in love romantically. They said that they have a loving, affectionate connection. Yes, but it was not romantic. It's not a certain bizarre. I have to emphasize this is not a case of a certain odd or new kind of romantic love. This is in my other course, maybe relevant, not this time around, so no.
but if they're doing it for like legal benefit, then it's fraudulent. For them, it should be allowed.
Okay, they are not asked to be married. They are asked, again, I will emphasize, they are asking to receive certain benefits that married or unmarried couples that do have a romantic relationship together, they receive it. So yes, formally you're right that the maybe automatic reaction would be to refuse and to reject their request because they are not a romantic couple. But here I come and ask you and challenge you whether we really expect a romantic relationship as a condition for the recognition of a certain family. Yes, Vera.
That's my question, like based on what romantic couples are getting it, because if there's a on paper romantic couple, yet they are married for 20 years, have not touched each other, they're so annoyed by one another, they even heterosexual, like wow, amazing, even having kids, like perfect on paper. Like why is it something that like the state is recognizing in a beneficial way? So the question is like what is that the state is looking for when they're like signing those couples for this kind of like benefits?
Right, and it's not just the state, it's us as society. Yes, Abhi?
I think there's a term in Hebrew called Drug Tzibur, which means like known in public.
Yes, no.
Okay. So which basically means that you a lot of times you get like the same benefits in some sense. Yeah, you get the same benefits as the married couple, even in cases of like inheritance. Someone if you're known in public, it's almost the same benefits they or he would get if he was a wife or that's like the company.
But this is still this is in some other countries, for instance, in Australia, they call it de facto. This kind of relationship, which is in Israel, is referred to as known in public. De facto, this relates to romantic couples that are living together. But we still can ask ourselves whether romantic couples need to prove their romance. Do they need to show that they are having sex? Do they need to bring the actual proof, biological proof to show that they have done it? Probably not. Yes.
I think the question is why are romantic couples getting benefits? And if we can look at that, then you can decide whether they get it or not. Because if the reason why, let's say for one reason that a romantic couple is getting a benefit is because they're assuming that they're going to have one car, which is better for the environment, which is like just for an example. And so that helps with the world. So we'll give them a benefit on this tax or whatever it is. And if it's something that this non-romantic couple that's living together that is also doing, if like they're also abiding by exactly what the romantic couple is abiding by, then they should also be getting the benefit. But if it's something that, I mean, I don't know what benefits you get for being romantic, but the rest of it, I feel like they should still be getting the benefits because if there's reason behind these benefits, then they are likely living them as well.
Okay, so you are more accepting. Your approach would be more inclusive for these kind of whether siblings. It can also be tomorrow a friend, a couple, a platonic couple. They don't have any romantic relationships nor sexual relationship. They're just, you can say, roommates, flatmates, but very good friends, and they say they are soulmates, and they are in some ways committed to living together, but this is one aspect that we need to ask ourselves whether there is a certain commitment here, whether there's exclusivity. And here again, we are coming to a difficulty because nowadays we're also accepting couples who are not exclusive with one another. So what declares a couple? Yes, ma'am.
For what, is this like a real scenario?
Yes,
So the
it's
question is,
actually happened to me.
for what process they wanted that kind of recognition or that paper? Because if it's for, I don't know, childcare money every month, then it's a shaky ground. Why would they get childcare? If they're not even romantic, they're just sisters, they're not planning on adopting the child and raising them as sisters without any romance, then probably the answer would be no by the court. No, you're not granted for child support. But if it's for, let's say, mortgage,
Yes,
oh, is
that was the case. That was exactly the case, yes.
Oh, okay.
And they also wanted a certain reduction in the city tax they were paying, again, because they are like, yes, family living together. Again, this is just an example. The courts refused. And again, there is a certain dilemma here because if we go historically, and again, this is another way to define relationships within families, kinship. So these sisters, actually more than the friends that I've mentioned before, these sisters are related in a certain way of kinship because they were born to the same parents. They're actually blood related. So they can maybe contend and claim that they are family by genetic means, biological means, also in terms of historical background because they grew up together. So they have a certain strong background to come and declare themselves as related under the roof of kinship. However, still, we are, despite our progressiveness and our openness and our inclusiveness towards new families and all kinds of new unions, we are still stuck somehow in a situation that we are, and I think we are, and I'm saying it without a solution. I don't have a solution for this, but I'm just saying that we need to acknowledge the fact that we are a little bit confused at the moment. Because on one hand, we come and say a couple can be childless, because in the past, a couple, usually was a heterosexual couple, always was a heterosexual couple, that their main intention or their main goal was to procreate. That's the evolutionary rule that made people become more and more monogamous. And the goal is to procreate and to survive. Okay, remember we mentioned it in my other course. And nowadays we admit that we can also be a couple and not procreate. On one hand, we can also procreate and not be a couple. So the procreation condition itself is not sufficient anymore and doesn't really create certain criteria for what is a couple and what is not. Another aspect used to be exclusivity. And this itself, as I've mentioned, is not a factor anymore. So we can talk about love and affection or romantic love and affection. Again, as Vera mentioned, we have nowadays couples who are married and recognized and formally receive all the rights while they hate each other. They cannot even look at each other face in the morning. They live in the same house, but in separate rooms, and they barely communicate. And this still, they would receive a certain, those benefits from the government, okay? So we are in a situation that we are still conflicted and not really decisive whether we have very clear boundaries to decide what is a family and which family will receive the recognition, the formal and social recognition, and which family will not. Okay, so that's just an example of this situation nowadays. It used to be way more simple and clear in the past. We have to admit it. And with progress comes complexity and also sometimes ambiguity and confusion. And that's, again, I'm not saying it to suggest that we should go backwards. I'm just saying we are still in a situation where it's not very clear where we are heading, what will be next, whether we will recognize families, for instance, of 3 parents like Canada have recently. Will we recognize, for instance, the option of adopting a sibling's child? For instance, in case of those sisters, they did not ask for that. But what if they were also raising a child together? One of them was a single parent by choice, becoming pregnant from sperm donation, and her sister living with her would be the other mom. And they are not romantically related and not a formal couple, but still the child is looking at his aunt as a parental figure. That's fact. So what are we doing with this? How do we deal with it formally, socially, psychologically? There are many, many questions, and we still don't have a very certain structured policy to know how to deal with these things. And one of the things that manages us, or this is why the court rejected, because there is a certain fear that, okay, this case of these sisters, by the way, they were 70 something, so it was not such a case that they had such a long future ahead, or it was a very, very specific case. But the court could not just look at their specific case and decide and find a very specific solution. It also needed to consider the social impact of such a decision and whether other similar and different arrangements would come to receive the recognition. And that, of course, also has a financial consequences because, again, certain reductions in mortgage and in city taxes and other taxes might result eventually a certain and have a certain price for the entire public. So this is the situation by now. And again, kinship, as we see it here, is something that is built by certain circles. And we, of course, have the inner circle of us, our siblings, direct siblings, and our parents. And this is, of course, the nuclear family. And this is a relatively modern concept, okay? If we go back to pre-industrial societies, the importance of the nuclear family was very much smaller and minor to the importance that nowadays in modern industrial society, the nuclear family receives. Okay, this is now, we can say that our nuclear family means a lot to each one of us, okay? In most cases at least. But in the past, in more tribal societies, this was not the case. We had, of course, circling the nuclear family, we have our extended family. And the extended family is different from the nuclear family in terms of generations, because in the nuclear family, we will always have just 2 generations. Yes, please.
Is the nuclear family the same as like an immediate family?
Yes, you can say that. Yes. Though an immediate, I wonder whether you will include a half sibling that lives with you as an immediate family or not. Because immediate family sometimes, again, it's less used in, I would say, academic literature. It's more of I hear the term immediate family in the popular discourse, okay? But usually people refer to that as someone that is blood related without any complications to them. So like a half sibling might not be my immediate family. For some, but yes, if you live with a half sibling and you grow up with this half sibling, yes, this is your nuclear family because this is your and what also defines the nuclear family is the household, something that was mentioned last class. And the household is something again that is an industrial era term, because prior to the Industrial Revolution, we had people that were living more in temporary locations and not necessarily surrounding themselves by walls. And if you think about that, the fact that we are nowadays, or in modern era, we are living in cubes, and most of us, even if those cubes are on the ground or whether they are up in the air, most of us are surrounded or we are residing within cubes. And those cubes are surrounding us in a certain way that is almost like a uterus, okay? And that provides protection and also isolation from the external environment. And that makes the nuclear family in many ways more secluded. That's also part of the problem and issues of modern nuclear families, that they are coping alone, not together alone. I mean, there are a few individuals within the nuclear family, but the nuclear family is very limited with resources if you compare it to the extended family. So the extended family, the 3 and plus and more generations that consisted, provides much more support. So, and I want to ask you, what do you see are the main advantages of the extended family as your basic building point of a family? Yes.
It's a larger support system. So you have more people in the community, and you have, more people with more resources and all sorts of, it's not just, I don't know, like, poor people where, it's, you're depending on these four, 2 of them are kids, who can't really like do very much for you, and like from a point of view of like, financial or like whatever those resources. Like if you have a whole extended family, you have people in all sorts of different places in life and different kinds of things that they can contribute to the community. And, it's a more like collaborative, like any family is like a collaborative thing, but it's collaborative on a slightly bigger scale. So it's actually
Right. So you have more support. And indeed, I often hear the question about ultra-Orthodox families and specifically ultra-Orthodox parents. And people ask, and they say, how can they raise 12 children? This is, and a lot of people that I meet with, they come and tell me, I barely make it with my 2. Or with my one son. So how can they deal with 12 children? And this is exactly the solution, because there's a lot of reliance on the extended family to provide the necessary means and to bridge those deficits and gaps that
Okay. Yeah, so just wanted to say that what we talked about last class, that like the boundaries or the roles and who's responsible for what, I think in an extended family, it's much more complicated to see through. Like, again, like who's responsible for what, the bond, like even just thinking about the bathroom, like using the bathroom when there's, you know, more people for one bathroom and then using it as a teenage girl and then like the grandma is going in and then the grandfather, like all those, I guess it just makes sense that more people has more challenges in that sense.
And you're saying challenges, and I want to say something more harsh, also more risks. And this is something that we also need to consider. I'm saying something that might be provocative or might be, again, debatable. But when we are discussing extended families and even the, sorry, not the right one, and the broader circle, which is whether we can call it a clan or a community, then we have more risks, for instance, of child abuse, of sexual abuse. That one of the reasons that the nuclear family very often tightens its security on its members and maybe put locks at the entrance of the cube is because this is also a way to protect its members from the outside world that has dangers, that has predators. And yes, we find that statistically that in families that are more living according to the extended structure, we might find more cases of abuse, all forms of abuse. So this is something that we need to take into consideration, and this is like a red flag that because there's a certain over-idealization sometimes of the extended family structure. We tend to, when we get to our chapter of both motherhood and childhood, we will see from two different angles that nowadays the modern family, because of so many challenges that are written here, we will review them shortly, the modern family very often longs to the ideal, historical, perfect, extended family. So a very burdened mom nowadays might think, wow, I wish I was living in this kind of chamula, we call it, in Hebrew, Arabic, meaning this is the extended big house family with generations living together. So if I lived there, I could be freer, I could be less burdened, I would get help, I would be supported, I would not feel so much alone with my postpartum depression. So that's one thing. And when we discuss children, we very often look at those children who are living in nuclear families today so much attached to their screens. And we think, I wish they lived in this extended family structure, playing instead of watching YouTube and TikTok. If they only had their cousins living with them, they would now run around and play hide and seek instead of watch another stupid clip. But this is a certain idealization. There is something truthful in it, and we will discuss it in our course, but we all the time need to remind ourselves that those extended families, and just like Thais also mentioned what happens in her home country in Brazil, often those extended structures fail. They have their fault, they have their security breaches, and we need to watch out. Yes.
I went to a boarding school for high school, and it's also another example of.
Thank you. Great. What do you think is relevant to this discussion in the boarding school?
So I went at 13, and it was like about 3 hours from my home. I wasn't home often. I have a very, like, for me, it was really positive. I grew up in a Jewish home in a very Jewish area, and the boarding school was Quaker Christian. And so it was like a very different exposure, to different values and a different way of seeing the world. And to me, it was a real benefit. My parents might disagree in some aspects. Like I think now it's sort of, I've caught up, but there were definitely things that I remember them being like, if you had been home during these like very formative years, this is like a value that we would have pinched more on. And I think now, like, I'm fine with it. At the time, I remember there was like, that was very much a point of friction for them. That they were, I'd come home and I would do things that were potentially different from the way that they would have wanted, like their three other kids were doing. And that was very difficult for them.
Okay, thank you. This is a very interesting perspective. Boarding school as a phenomena is interesting because it comes from the students in this class because often there are students coming from New York, from Manhattan specifically, and somehow I see a certain correlation from growing up in Manhattan with growing up with a nanny. And this is my own observation from courses here. And but again, nannies can also be outside New York and also in Israel. But the nanny, the function of the nanny is also an interesting, challenging concept in the world of the family. Because what do you think about the child that is growing up with one nanny that kind of accompanies and takes care of this child from the age of 0, from birth until their first grade? 6 years of life, the first elementary basic years of nurturing and education. What do you think is the experience? Do you think she becomes the mother? Do you think she's substituting for the mother? Do you think the mother becomes unimportant or irrelevant in this case? Yes.
I was raised by a nanny.
In Manhattan?
But actually, but like both Manhattan and Russia, and I was actually raised by 2 nannies that would switch, and which is like an odd scenery.
How was their arrangement? Like the
morning and night. I would wake up at 5 a.m. every single morning, and I was that type of child who would go to sleep at 6 p.m. I think the mother figure at some point just vanishes. it's not bad. Like, don't look at me as like this is something bad. It's just an experience I've had. But definitely one parental figure just like kind of disappears at some point, just because you kind of see that you're like, oh, like we live in the same household, but it's not like my mom still like took me out somewhere like on the weekends and everything. But overall, the nanny becomes your extended family. Like she becomes the parental figure who you're scared of, who is your authoritative figure in the family. That's first what my
Okay, that's very interesting. So you say that in your experience, she was not part of the nuclear family?
I think it's a mix. You still feel like it's not your actual family. You still have that boundary of like your parent is your parent. Like, of course, if something very bad happens, I would not go to her. I would go to my mom. You still, maybe it's just the way I was.
No. This is something very actually central. We will hear others and then I'll summarize the concept. Yes, please.
So I was also raised with like nannies. Both my parents worked full time. So my older brother and I would say probably from age like 0 until 5th grade, had nannies. I will say that like, I think my mom was still I very much had a mother figure in my mom. And even though she would come home late, like she was always the one to parent us and discipline us. And it was never a scenario where like the nanny is disciplining us. She more like left that for my parents to do when they got back from work.
Okay.
So I still saw them as like the authoritative figures. But I will say she did become like, I kind of saw her as an older sister. And someone who I could always go to and rely on, but for me, it was less of a parental figure.
Okay, it's interesting because you use the term parental figure, and you're saying that she was more like an older sister.
Yeah.
Okay? Thank you. Yes.
I think it depends how involved the nanny is and how absent the parents are as well. Like in South Africa, where I'm from, pretty much everyone has nannies. But I would say that for most people, it doesn't replace your parents at all. They're not like a parental figure. But when I was younger, she would sometimes look after me or play games. But my parents would always like be there, and like my mom would do all of my things for school, like cover the books and all of that when I was young. So I would say it was more just like an extra as opposed to like replacing.
Okay, so she did not replace. She was an extra. Okay, interesting. Another good aspect. Yes.
I feel really strongly about this because I feel like it's more similar to boarding schools and private schools where they can either be a real luxury or actually the emergency alternative, the support that you need. It's not so unlike social workers and like the methapnim it's like you have nurses and people who become part of your family. The more they help people in need, and the more they're
You're more referring to the elderly.
in this case, yes, but also like you have a large population here with like disabilities and special needs who also have from childhood or earlier, like from the time they're born even, you have people who like grow up with their social worker or their caretaker who's not their parent, but also like from my own personal experience, I never had a nanny like for luxurious reasons. I had it when my parents were divorced and my mom felt very strongly, oh, I work full time, I need someone to help me out. But it actually caused more strife because my dad said, what the hell, I work full time. Why don't I get a nanny? And why does, the mom in this case get extra support and extra payment, even in child support? And fathers are often left out of this.
Great. That's the gender perspective of the nanny situation. Yes, Julia?
I have more of a question.
Yeah.
What if the nanny is more like an unconstant stream of babysitters?
Well, that's good question because I think that again, there's now we are entering the more, I'd say, psychological dilemma of parents that are looking for solutions, and I think that if I look at the child's best interest and the child's well-being, I think that there is a strong advantage to a more stable, permanent as much as possible, even if it's true switching nannies, but the fact that there's this stable, known, and long-term relationship with a certain nanny or babysitter, even if it's a babysitter or not a nanny, and I think we can Again, we're not going to define them now, but we could. So the stability and the permanence is an advantage. Okay, as much as I see it, because if you have like how did you term it? You said like a
Unconstant.
yes. Then that kind of rings the bell with instability, inconsistency, chaos. So it sounds less likely, unless again these are babysitters that come just for an hour. So
Let's say the babysitters came, they picked you up from school, and they were a mother figure in a sense. And then they would stay until you go to sleep, and then your parents would come home at night, but they wouldn't stay. Like, me and my siblings would, in a sense, drive them away. Like,
because
like,
you're
it was in between the time where like my dad's side of the family moved out and like all that. And my mom went back to school, and my dad was working late, so they couldn't leave like us home or by ourselves, obviously, because we were younger kids. So we had like an unconstant stream of babysitters that were like in a sense a nanny for us. But like they would be there for when we got back to school, so when we go to sleep, but they wouldn't stay for longer than like a week or 2 weeks, and they were just different.
It sounds like it's not ideal. Okay, so again, if we had more time, or maybe it's like also too personal, then you could maybe you can do it in your final paper. You can try and ponder and consider the perspectives and the consequences and the impact of that experience on you personally. Some people will claim that maybe this has toughened them or made them more adjusting to challenges and to changes. For instance, changing when I used to do my reserve service, interviewing candidates for officer, the officer position in the IDF. So I used to see that a lot of, I would say, soldiers would be very proud and take a lot of pride in the fact that they have moved a lot of locations during their childhood, or even sometimes moved a few countries because of their parents' work, etc. Now, this is a good example that sometimes having many changes during your childhood can be seen as a certain opening, enriching, I would say constructive experience, while we can also see it as a long-term damaging, weakening experience, because stability is something very important. And again, when we will talk about childhood and one of the requirements of childhood, usually, yes, stability is important. I would not say that stability needs to be the only principle that we need to obey and to follow, but it is something that we have to take into consideration. So when people do consider their relocation and they think of their children, yes, this is a good idea to consider. I'm not saying that this is the only factor you should take into consideration, or because of that, there will be no relocations during your children's first 12 years of life. No, but it's something to consider. Yes, Ilan.
Also, just wanted to point out, I'm somebody that has worked a job that's involved like supervising kids for about 4 years now, and regarding the stability factor, I've noticed a pattern of always the kids that have the most behavioral problems, the ones that find out the most, the ones that kind of do that. It always traces back to something that's going on in the family. Like, it's like crazy how much like you compare a kid who has a very stable family life and a kid who doesn't. It's really, really heartbreaking, but it's a pattern that I picked up on.
Well, this is an interesting insight. Again, I can also challenge it and say that we need to be very cautious, because again, it's nature versus nurture again. And you are highlighting the role of nurture, the environment, and the stability. And again, as a psychologist, I could not agree more. But at the same time, we have to always consider the fact that sometimes we will have a few children that are undergoing the same circumstances, maybe same problematic circumstances, and one child will be very adapting to the constant changes, and we will see that this child might compensate easily on these deficits in stability, while other children will respond very dramatically and very harshly, like those that you are.
Very harshly, but typically, they have a harder time behavior.
Yes, you see the impact. You cannot, and that's true. I mean, even the most, I would say, fortunate adjusting child, even in these circumstances of many sudden changes, we will see maybe minor impact or influence, but we will see them. Yes.
I want to add, like, as a personal experience, as like having nannies and everything, I've moved like 15 times in my life to different houses and countries and everything. And as a person myself, like I get asked, oh, how did you manage? I'm like, as a person, I am so calm and accepting that since like my parents divorced when I was 5, but I accepted it immediately. I was like, okay, just things.
Frustration, and then creating certain long-term damages. Yes, Ilan?
I think this touches on that and stability and moving a lot. I don't know if it happens here, but something in the States that's common is nesting after divorce and separation.
Okay, we'll discuss it when we
What's the word?
nesting.
So it's when you're separating or divorcing or whatever, and the parents move, one parent at a time comes in to live at the house you lived in originally. I didn't do this with my family. I had a much better experience going to live with my grandparents. I look back on that fondly. But a lot of people, like my step-siblings, for example, are very screwed up because they had one parent coming in, changing the whole house, taking things out, doing whatever shenanigans they want in the home. And then the next week, the other parent switches and everything is upside down. And the kids, it's intended by the courts and the social workers to give you more stability and keep them in the same place, but it often creates more harm.
Okay, thank you. I will ask you to maybe elaborate on that when we get to divorce. We have a specific entire class just for divorce, and nesting will be one of the issues that we will consider. But just to sum up the nanny issue, I just want to share a certain important insight that is very consistent with nannies. And this is maybe surprising or maybe not, the fact that even if you have a nanny that is stable, permanent, and very, I would say, dedicated, in terms of hours of her caring and her attitude and concern towards the child, still the child will be able very early to differentiate between the nanny and the mother. And the mother does not lose its status as a mother. And this is very important because sometimes even mothers are concerned, or they are contemplating whether taking a nanny will be reducing their maternal connection to the child, whether the child will see them as a stranger, or maybe they will be excluded from the nuclear family and be looked as an extended family. And this is a nightmare for any mother or any parent. No one would have liked that. So I just want to reassure you all, if you wish in the future to take a nanny and to hire a nanny, this will not endanger your maternal position. And this is because somehow, and if anyone has an insight or a thought of explaining it, the child does understand the difference, and the understanding comes very, very early, even within months of life. Even a relatively young baby that is 6 months old will distinguish and differentiate between the nanny and the mother. And even if the nanny is extremely caring and shows affection, concern, warmth, everything that we look in the ideal mother, still there will be a preference for the mother. And that's, again, the general rule. I'm not saying that it never has happened, the opposite, because yes, sometimes we do have mothers who are technically mothers, but they do have a certain issue with their own maternal function, or they are suffering from certain pathologies that don't allow them to function as mothers. And in those cases, we might see things going on differently in a different direction than the general ideal situation. Okay, so back to history. So I've mentioned before that the nuclear family in pre-industrial communities and times were less dominant, which is true. However, in the past, like had we talked or we looked in books that were written on the history of family in the 30s and 40s of the last century, we would see a certain idea or a certain consensus that in pre-industrial societies, nuclear families did not have any role at all. They were non-existent, or they could not be distinguished because it was always just the extended family and the clan and the tribe or the community. But later on, there were a few archaeological findings of certain skeletons that were, I want to find it, it's not so sympathetic, I'm sorry. But what we see here is, again, tested by with a genetic chromosome diagnosis, that these three humans are related, and they are actually a nuclear family of a parent and 2 children, and they died together. They died from a fire in Germany, and not just from that finding, but also from other findings, we now know and we recognize the fact that also in pre-industrial societies, nuclear families did have a certain role and a certain place in the community. So sometimes you would probably find the nuclear family having their own moment, and still in times of danger, you would find that the nuclear family members are taking care more on each other before they are taking care. They are prioritizing their care and their immediate health for their own nuclear family members. And that's very interesting. And that's also tells us why still the nuclear family has a certain evolutionary value, because when we discuss altruism is a certain trait, a human trait, of helping someone else who is in need without expecting any benefits or reciprocity from it. And altruistic behavior is something that, in general, is very positive, very constructive. We want it in society. We need it in society. Without altruism, we would be in a much weaker and worse condition in general as society. But so altruistic behavior is something that is very important for our survival as human kind, as species. And the nuclear family, and that's also a finding in research, that the nuclear family, the level of altruistic behavior within the nuclear family is stronger. And another interesting finding is that the level of altruistic finding is also higher, even if you don't know that the person that you are helping is your immediate family or nuclear family, but this person is genetically related to you. And this is also surprising, that maybe somehow we have within ourselves a certain DNA detector that knows or recognizes those who are related to us. So this is very interesting. You know, sometimes we do these kind of quizzes with people, letting them guess with parents and children who is related to whom. And it's very interesting to see that people in general tend to conclude and make conclusions out of certain very specific elements. For instance, the eyes, the color of the eyes, the general skin tone, a few very prominent features in the face. And not always these are the right answers. So, but still, when you have to guess who is related to, there's a higher chance that your guess will be truthful. So, yes, we can sometimes look down upon genetic relationships. And just like we mentioned here, we can have a stepbrother or a stepsister that we feel very deeply related, even more than our genetic brother and sister. But still, when we might be in danger of, lately we all have been exposed to scenarios, horrible scenarios of danger and death threats and actual death and danger. In these kinds of scenarios, we will find that the immediate automatic reaction is to help your nuclear family and your genetically related relatives. Yes, Sarah.
So what does that say like about adopted children? As opposed there's just research based, it's just less of a need to protect a child that you adopted even at infancy?
No. So this kind of when people adopt and they adopt, you are adopting as a parent. You never adopt as a sibling. It would be interesting. It might be different if we examined and we compared adopted siblings. And again, adopted siblings, meaning not siblings that grew up together because one of them was adopted and one was not, or both of them were adopted. But let's say we would allow individuals to adopt the siblings and to decide, okay, you are my siblings from now on. Siblings, that would be the case that we might see the difference. But when you are a parent and you adopt a child, then you form a certain connection that eventually, not just me, it's not just me thinking that, it's stronger than the genetic factor, because you are a parent now, you have the responsibility, you have the parental authority and responsibility and concern over this child. And through the relationship, through the parental relationship, you form a certain bond that will usually, that again, there will always be exceptions, bad exceptions, unfortunately, but in general, the bond will be just as strong. Okay, so this is not about adoptions. So when we go back in time, we can differentiate between pre-industrial societies where we had nuclear families, but those nuclear families only had their moments, but the general ongoing daily life routine was centered around the extended family. And then around the 17th century and on, the changes began occurring, and we've seen the industrial society coming with more of nuclear families structures that are looking for themselves and taking care of themselves. Now, the nuclear family in history, when we review it, also brought up a very gender divided role acquisition, meaning we had the father and the mother, the husband and the wife, and each one of them tightly related to the gender received a certain status, a certain list of responsibilities, duties, and rights. And of course, what do you think this role allocation suffered from? What was the main issue with the role allocation in nuclear families that had their gender biased sharing of the domestic responsibilities and also the parental responsibilities? What did that result with? What do you think was the consequences of the classic gendered, very strict gendered biased role allocations in families?
Fathers were left out.
Left out.
Or like it was their decision.
Because when you say that they were left out, it sounds like they were underprivileged.
From today's perspective, from the household, they were left out.
Okay, that's true. Yes, they were left out, and that resulted with, like, when you think about their relationships with their children, or no relationship. Yeah, the lack of relationship, lack of relatedness, or a remoteness, or distance, or alienation. Yes. What else? Yes, Noah?
Mothers being really overly burdened. And then at the same time, also, when a father is putting in, whatever it is worth called, doing really what we might consider the bare minimum, then they're, celebrated. Whereas, a woman doing the same thing is like, okay, that's, that's what she's supposed to be doing.
Right. It justifies. There's a certain internal justification for also this burden on the female side of the equation. Thank you. What else? Yes.
It creates kind of like a hierarchy, social class system.
Indeed. And in this hierarchy, who is more privileged and who is less?
The men. The breadwinners, okay, because they're the ones who are supporting the family and keeping everyone afloat.
Right. So this is a very important aspect, because when you are the breadwinner, on one hand, I think, at least I remember my father complaining about this position of being the provider, about how tough it is to take this responsibility, how much he suffers from having to go to work while my mother worked the same. But he still felt that the pressure was on him. So we heard a lot of complaints, but those complaints maybe were distracting us from recognizing the fact that when you are the breadwinner, you also are in the position of having the resources, controlling the resources, and having the power and the accessibility to the resources. Yes, Bella.
It's like double reality, like who's the boss when dad is home, when dad is not home, in what position he's in at his work. So maybe he's, just one out of the many working in the factory, and then he comes home and then he can practice his power, or being a boss at work and then he comes home and the children are actually looking up to the mother more because they are spending most of their times with the mom. So she's the authority figure when dad is not, like this whole uncertainty of like who's in what role.
Yes, you are highlighting a certain phenomena, which is the paradox of who is in charge. And again, in those classic, I would say, not current nuclear families in which the father was the breadwinner and he was the provider, we would see a certain, I would say, a transition or a certain constant changes between situations in which the mother was actually the boss and the one dominating the household. We have a certain expression in Hebrew, we call it balabusta. She's owning the house. You can recognize them, those women in this position, because you enter their apartments, homes, and you see the leadership, you see the dominance, and you see also the authority that they have. And then there's the father who might be outside someone. You gave an example of a factory worker that maybe is actually in the bottom of his work hierarchy, but we can also discuss the successful businessman who is owning a company and has a lot of employees and then comes home and he's not in charge anymore. And he has his balabusta, the strong woman who is dominating the house. And we have a certain switch in the hierarchy. But this is also, again, this is one way to look at it. It's an maybe idealizing way to look at it, because we are kind of looking at this mother and saying, oh, she has a lot of power, she has a lot of control, she's dominating her household, her family, her children are looking up to her, she has the stronger relationship with her children, and this father is actually left out, just like you said. But this is, again, this is just, I would say, a one-sided or a biased perspective of the situation, because in other words, she's stuck at home. She doesn't have the opportunity to follow her dreams. Maybe she has additional aspirations. Maybe she has certain qualities and traits and skills that she wished to develop outside of the home, and she cannot. It's not really her choice, or we can discuss whether it's her choice or not. And that, Ilan, you mention all the time the Orthodox Jews. We can also discuss that, because when we sometimes have a certain dialogue with Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox women, they say we are the real feminists, and we can sometimes wonder whether they are seeing something that we are missing out, but they cannot just do whatever they want. So with all the respect to, again, the empowerment that they feel, and we can also respect it for real, because they do have their stand and their, I would say, ethos of victorious standing in their own society, because they are really very essential and important, because they are both the providers and the domestic managers of their families. This is maybe the most empowering position on earth. But on the other hand, they are not included in certain activities, and they are not enjoying the accessibility to certain positions, activities, and also opportunities that maybe they could have enjoyed. Yes, Noah?
I want to say that there's this differentiation in, what is considered work and what is valued as work, where, you have men who are, going to work and they're the breadwinner. So that's the official work, they get paid, and it's really it's valued, and, and then meanwhile you have the woman who is at home working really hard, raising a family, running the house, all of that, very hard work. But it's not seen as work. It's just seen as what she's supposed to do, and she's not getting compensated for it in any way. And the guy is just the breadwinner. She's he's the one who gets this actual respect, and she's just fulfilling her role. And if she didn't do it, it would be.
So, and you are raising a point that actually the liberal feminism raised, looking and also socialist feminism raised, and this is to look at the domestic labor as something that is also worth money. So it's not just one breadwinner and one woman who sits at home and is in Hebrew the term is akeret fight, which is something very problematic because it's the term that is used is also for being, it's closed in Hebrew to infertile. So she's like non-productive home sitter. And this is actually the opposite of what she's doing, because she's actually managing a house. And if you have taken a nanny to do that, you would have to pay in central Tel Aviv 15,000 shekels a month, okay, for those services. So it's worth a very, very high salary in actual life. And this is very important. Yes, right?
Yeah, and actually it's much more like than the money and everything. I have I've been working at kindergarten from some time, and in Brazil I already worked in an office, and I can tell you in the office I never heard of any of my colleagues or everything the word love, the word do you love what you are doing? Do you love this child? You have to love what you are doing. You have to love the Excel sheets and everything. But when I am at the kindergarten, I heard you have to love these kids. Even in a day that you don't, they are not my kids,
And you're still expected to love them.
No, and I love them, for sure. I love them. I'm not saying I'm a horrible person and I'm going to do something to, harsh them and anything. But teaching nowadays, especially when you are a woman, is extremely associated with, you have to love as a mom, because we don't see the work that the women do inside the home as work. We see money as something that is not dignifying it. So it's much more then, okay, let's go and let's pay nannies and let's pay people to do it's also our mentality about it. It's also the way we see this. We don't see as work. We see as something that you have to do as a matter of love. And I'm saying that because a lot of parents, it's not 1, 2, or 3, asks us for extra hours for free. Because you love my kid,
Right. Well,
So-
that's true about, many professions, that also social workers suffer from this bias of you're doing something holy, you're doing something so altruistic, and altruism is not paid. It's not expected to be paid, but it should be. Okay, so next class we will discuss certain, I would say, theoretical approach